Hello and welcome to this conversation. I'm Rahul Pandita. The war in Ukraine has intensified in the last few days. There have been dozens of airstrikes resulting in thousands of deaths. Hundreds of thousands of people are under siege, with Russia blocking food and water. To understand how this invasion has unfolded, we have with us Marci Shore. She is an associate professor of history at Yale University and the author of several books, most recently of The Ukrainian Night, An Intimate History of Revolution. Together with her husband, the scholar Professor Timothy Snyder, she has been at the forefront of raising awareness about the war in Ukraine. I had the privilege and honor of attending one of her classes several years ago at Yale. Thank you so much, Marci, for joining us today. I know it's a very busy time for you, and I believe you're getting very little sleep. But for our audience in India, will you give us a sense of how you are feeling? What are your own personal feelings about the war in Ukraine?
It's been devastating, and I feel ridiculous saying that because I'm on the other side of the world. I'm in a place that's relatively safe, at least, as safe as America ever is, and my family and I feel like we've been living in this war. It feels like a tear in time. It feels like the world that existed a month ago no longer exists, that there's no continuity. Since the moment that invasion happened, I've been trying to shake myself out of the disbelief. And then I've just been following news reports in different languages and checking on my friends to make sure they're still alive, and talking to journalists and talking to students, and thinking this must be a nightmare, that you're going to wake up and it's going to be over. I think moments like this too, like force even people like me, like I'm a scholar, I'm a historian, I study these things, like I'm a historian of the 20th century, like I know what kind of evil is possible in the world. And even so, the moral shock, is still there, like the sheer possibility of so much evil. Like, still, how can that be a moral shock to me? I study these things, I'm familiar with them, I know what's possible. I knew there was a possibility that Putin would invade. But I look at, also, I've gotten so many letters and emails, and from readers, from students, from colleagues, from distant acquaintances, from people I'd forgotten I ever met, people asking how they can help, people getting on planes and going to Poland and working with refugees, people who had nothing to do with Ukraine, sending, money to these humanitarian efforts. And I think, like, there are millions and millions of good people in the world. There are all these millions of people trying to help, and so how is it possible that a handful of psychopaths can wreak so much evil? It's just not right. The world shouldn't be like that.
Give us a sense of what is happening in Ukraine right now. How are people in Ukraine suffering under the Russian siege?
Well, the Russians have been bombing civilians. It's, they are trying to bomb the country into submission. They are, they're bombing maternity hospitals, they're bombing bread factories, they're bombing, apartment buildings and residential neighborhoods. They are shelling people who are on humanitarian evacuation routes. It's a kind of, burn the whole thing to the ground. The population has been extraordinarily united. I mean, this is a thing that Slava said to me like 3 days into the war. He sent me this text message and said, Marci, you don't know how happy I am when I see how Ukrainians are responding, like that the spirit and the solidarity and the dignity, and the bravery and the cooperation, like this was the Ukraine he had dreamt about. This was the Ukraine so many of my friends who are of my generation were wanted to come into being and to develop on the ashes of the Soviet Union. And there is a sense that like that they are there, like in that, like that. My friend Yurko wrote from Lviv, and he said the solidarity is indescribable. You've never experienced something like this. People have been saying like that the spirit of the Maidan that we feared was a brief moment is there. You know, it's there and it's back. You know, and civil society is doing everything, but not only is civil society doing everything. I mean, 8 years ago, only civil society was doing everything. You know, 8 years ago, it turned out that, you know, Ukraine didn't really have an army, and it was exclusively being crowdfunded on the internet when the war in the Donbass started. Now it turns out there's a functioning state. I mean, in fact, a state that is functioning remarkably well. And there's a functioning army. And in addition, you have this civil society that's stepped up. So there's tremendous, you know, resistance, there's tremendous cooperation. But you're dealing with somebody who is unhinged and just doesn't care how many people he kills. You know, and in that sense, it's an unequal battle. It's not just a question of somebody has more weapons and somebody has fewer weapons, and you know, well, the West is delivering weapons, and that will even it out, because you're dealing with somebody for whom other people's lives have no meaning whatsoever, and therefore anything is possible. Therefore, there's no restraint.
Does he look like a man in control to you?
To me, no. And I know this is a debate, you know, whether or not Putin can be understood as a rational actor. And of course, I have no especially privileged, you know, epistemological access to what is going on inside Putin's head. But I can tell you this, that I listened very carefully 8 years ago to Putin's Crimea speech after the illegal annexation of Crimea, which, you know, we could like call that, you know, the Sudetenland, or call that the Anschluss. And it was a very grandiose speech. It was very carefully choreographed. It was all false, but it was, you know, it was done with a certain rationality, a cleverness. He was the grand strategist. He was very shrewd. He was manipulative in a very almost kind of scientific way. When I listened to him 3 weeks ago now, give that hour-long speech on the Monday before the invasion started,
Yes.
my intuition, and you can take this with a grain of salt because I'm not a native Russian speaker, but my intuition listening to that was that that was no longer the same person, that he was unwell, that he was much more unhinged, that his contact with reality had gotten, you know, much vaguer. And my intuition was that we're no longer in the paradigm of a high stakes chess game. We're now in the paradigm of a Shakespearean drama, and an aging man facing his own mortality has decided to create immortality by destroying the world. That was my intuition, you know, again, based on no privileged information, but that was my intuition.
I wanted to ask you about the symbolism of some terms that Mr. Putin has used in his justification of the war, especially when he said he was invading Ukraine for the denazification of Ukraine. You and Tim in particular, you know, you try to warn about the perils of not learning lessons from the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. What do you feel when Putin puts such words into use?
And this was actually a conversation between me and Tim. My first impulse when he started with this rhetoric, and Putin maybe 6 months ago or 9 months ago had written this kind of crazy article about Ukraine and Russia and one people, and setting out his own kind of his view of history. And my impulse was that this is just not worth engaging. It's not worth dignifying with a response. And Tim's impulse was that, no, it's actually important that we respond. It's important that we respond as historians, and it's important that we like set the narrative right. I mean, so of course, denazification, I mean, Nazi became like this word with immediate visceral, resonance, you know, and it hits people at the level of affect, must save people, must denazify, embodiment of evil. It obviously makes no sense, you know, in the course of present day Ukraine. Putin was using this story during the Maidan, that the Maidan was a kind of Western-sponsored Nazi conspiracy and Ukrainian fascists were going to kill all the native Russian speakers in Ukraine. And that story got him some traction with the West during the Maidan, the fear maybe these are extreme nationalists, maybe it's a revolution by extreme nationalists, and we should not support them. It got him traction at the beginning of the war in the Donbass. Like there were many people in the Donbass, maybe say a third of them, who thought, oh, maybe there are Nazis coming to kill us. You know, maybe they do want to kill the Russian speakers. Maybe we do need to be protected. That story did get some traction at the time. And maybe I should just add as a footnote for your viewers, and Indians should be in a much better position to understand this than Americans because you're a multilingual country. Ukraine is a bilingual country. I mean, you could say it's also a multilingual country, and a lot of people also speak Polish and, you know, now English and German, but it's a bilingual country in English and I'm sorry, in Russian and Ukrainian. And in general, as you go east, Russian is more dominant, and as you go west, you know, Ukrainian is more dominant. But that obscures the fact that basically everybody can switch back and forth, and had for a very long time. It would be completely normal for there to be a conversation like this going on Ukrainian television with one of us speaking Ukrainian and the other one speaking Russian, like just. We answer in whatever we feel comfortable answering in. So anyway, so this was this was the construction. Now that story seems even more insane because at this point you have a democratically elected president, Volodymyr Zelensky, who is Jewish and openly Jewish. It's not a secret that he's Jewish. It's not a secret that his family died in the Holocaust. And he's a native Russian speaker. You know, he does speak Ukrainian, and he, you know, has been speaking Ukrainian, you know, now all the time, especially, but he gave an address to Russians right before the invasion started in Russian. His Russian is better than his Ukrainian. And he was elected with 73% of the vote. So the idea that he is actually running a Nazi dictatorship is so absurd that it's not even clear to me it makes any sense to engage it. But, you know, for the record, you know, that is the situation. And I should also add, for the record, I don't think that story has gotten the traction at all that it got 8 years ago. 8 years ago, a lot of us who work on Ukraine were very frustrated, and we felt like we needed to intervene with the English language media, with the German language media. There was a phenomenon in Germany of the so-called Putin-Versteher, those who thought we should understand Putin's point of view. And people were like, well, there has been a history of Ukrainian nationalism. Maybe there are extremist elements. That story now, I think, has zero traction, basically, anywhere except Russia. You know, and then the big question is, you know, the Russians who support the war, what do they actually believe they're supporting? You know, they're supporting, for the most part, something they believe is a so-called special operation that is just designed, you know, to liberate and rescue, you know, their poor, oppressed, Russian-speaking Ukrainian brothers and sisters who have been victimized and persecuted by this Nazi dictatorship.
I mean, I'm very far away, Marci, but it's sometimes very sad to see some of the young Russian soldiers who get caught, and then they speak to the local media, and there's someone who's present there with a mobile camera, and you know, this young man who's barely, you know, beyond his teens, saying that he had absolutely no idea about the fact that, you know, he was being sent to Ukraine for this war. It's sad, isn't it?
It's wrenching, you know. Ukrainians and Russians did not hate each other, and now they will. I mean, now, like, Putin has provoked the very situation that he claimed. I mean, just like there had never been resistance against Russia in Ukraine, at least that I had ever encountered, before Putin provoked a war there, you know, and then he created the situation that he had been, you know, claiming to rectify. No, these young soldiers coming in, I mean, even, okay, we say there are 200,000 people there, say there are some, you know, small group of special operations. Let's say, you know, there's some select group of sadists who exist in every culture. But that's not most people. Like, I don't believe that Russia is a country of 144 people who just for reasons of pure sadism want nothing more, than to go out and massacre Ukrainians. Oh, our brothers, our brothers, we have to go bomb their cities. I mean, that's what's so horrific about these 18, 19-year-old kids.
Yeah.
And I think, what do they even know what they're doing, and how have they ended up there? And the real question, in some sense, I mean, you can ask a question of like, what has happened to Ukrainian society that they're doing such an extraordinary job resisting? This is a society that has matured tremendously. This is, for me, it's very much the legacy of the revolution. You can ask that question. But really understanding what's happening and how it happened is not about understanding Ukraine. It's about understanding Russia. I mean, the fact that people don't want to be invaded, raped, pillaged, bombed, they don't want their cities decimated, they don't want their people mass murdered, that doesn't actually require explanation. Like, you don't actually have to think, oh, wow, how do we understand their reaction? And look, like they've kidnapped, the mayor of this city,
Yes.
because he's an ethnic Russian. How does that work? Well, you can easily be an ethnic Russian and politically identified as Ukrainian, which many, many people are. It's not an ethnic question. So that, in that sense, that doesn't require explanation. What requires explanation is what has happened in Russia, or what has not happened in Russia since 1991, that Putin has been allowed to get this hold over the population. That he has been allowed to send these 18, 19-year-old kids to kill people having no idea what they're doing or why, or thinking they're in some other story. And why is this country allowing it to happen?
It has also dented this powerful image, of Russia as a military power, really, because, at least speaking from an Indian perspective, there are many people in India who believed when the war broke out that, in front of a superpower like Russia, a small country, relatively small country, will not, in terms of military strength, will not last for long. But now it's already been, 3 weeks, and the kind of resistance which the Ukrainians have put up is phenomenal. I was looking at the images of President, roaming around in the streets and making these videos. It's quite fascinating, isn't it?
It is there's a kind of unanimity that's perhaps unprecedented in Ukrainian history. 8 years ago, there was really a sense that the East could be divided, that there were going to be a lot of people in the Donbass who would believe the story about the Ukrainian Nazis coming to kill them, who would welcome the separatists. It was unclear which way Kharkiv would go. It was unclear which way Odessa would go. Now there's an incredible amount of unity. Nobody wants to be invaded by Russia. And I think it's not about whether your Russian is better or your Ukrainian is better. It's not about were your parents ethnically of this group or that group or of Jewish origin. Nobody wants to be invaded by Russia. It's a different society. It's a different political culture. They've worked a lot on this democracy. It's not perfect. There's been all sorts of bumps. They're struggling with corruption, but they've developed an extraordinary civil society, which was the miracle of the Maidan. And they are coming together to say, no, this isn't what we want. I don't understand how militaries work, well enough, but I know that even my Ukrainian friends and colleagues who are the least violent, last people in the world to ever pick up a gun, everybody will resist to the very end. And it's not clear to me that the Russian troops are that motivated. If they're motivated by a reason that is false. And it seems to me sooner or later, people must start to take in that reality that this is not the story we're told. I mean, if they were told that you're going to be graded as a liberator, and now they're hearing these, people who are the age of their grandmother who grew up in the Soviet Union, who are speaking their own language, saying, go away, we don't want you here. That has to at some point penetrate. And in this case, I do think the language is important. Like when I listen to, I have a friend who is who is going through cancer treatment, and she was in in the hospital having chemotherapy that Wednesday the invasion started. And she was listening to Zelensky's address. Her Russian is very good. She was listening to Zelensky's address to the Russian people in Russian hours before this invasion started, in which Zelensky said, please don't do this. We don't want to fight with you. You know, this isn't what we want. This aren't the relations we want to have. You know, we're not your enemies. Please don't do this. I mean, if you come attack us, we will defend ourselves. You won't see our backs. You will see our faces. We will look you in the eye, but please don't. It's not what we want. And it was one of the best addresses and most moving addresses I had ever seen. And my friend who was in the hospital actually came literally like right from the hospital, from getting chemotherapy, having just listened to this speech, into my kitchen and said, you have to listen to this. You know, and that was a speech that only a native Russian speaker could give to Russians. There was an intimacy about it, you know, and in some ways, like these are soldiers who are getting to a place where they're talking to people who are speaking their own language, literally speaking their own language. And I have to think that has to somehow play some role in giving us a better chance for some kind of that understanding to penetrate.
Are the Western powers doing enough? Is the United States, which was at the other end of the spectrum of the Cold War history, is the United States doing enough?
No, that's a good question. I'm probably also very unqualified to say because I'm also emotionally involved. You know, so for me, I feel like, of course not. No, you have to stop it. Somebody has to stop this. I mean, I of course understand. I understand that the major consideration is you don't want to provoke a nuclear war. And then the question becomes, if you intervene sooner, is that more likely to provoke? If you intervene later, is that less likely to provoke? And what we know from history is that, you know, we're in the world of radical contingency. It could be that whatever we do, Putin is determined to push that button, you know, and end history with himself as the great ender of history. It could be that in either case, he would push the button. We don't know, you know, we're guessing at this point. My sense is that the Ukrainians are fighting for all of us. You know, I don't think Putin will stop at Ukraine. I don't think we're in a rational actor paradigm. You know, I was on a panel with a very smart colleague of mine. We were talking to students, and you know, I was talking from my, I'm sure, overly emotional Slavicist perspective. You know, I'm an intellectual historian. I deal with many things that are fuzzy. I know a lot of writers and philosophers. And he was, you know, he was a game theorist, you know, dealing with his world as a chess match. And I just felt like all the things he's saying are very smart, but they seemed irrelevant to me because I thought that, you know, the game theory works if you're playing chess and everyone's agreed on the rules. You know, but what if somebody decides to take the board and throw it up and like slash all the pieces? You know, then it doesn't help. What if we're outside the realm of rationality? And so, yeah, my feeling is like Putin has to be ended immediately. Like in some way, somebody has to get rid of him. Somebody has to put a stop to him. I think he could easily blow up the world. I don't see any reason that he would stop at the borders of NATO. I'm also influenced because I'm a historian of the Second World War. So like in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, you know, we're in, you know, 1939, but with internet, and we can see it all in real time. Like imagine if, you know, 1939, there were internet, and you could watch everything live streamed.
Yes. You know, I was listening to one of your podcasts where you historically speak about the Chernobyl disaster of 1986 when Ukraine was not an independent nation. And you speak about a particular event, I think a May Day parade, which was forced to happen in Chernobyl at that point in time, in Ukraine, which resulted in an extra number of deaths. And you say in that podcast that it is at that moment that the civil movement really began in Ukraine. In your mind, do you think that Putin has some sort of unfinished business in Ukraine?
Putin has unfinished business in the world. I mean, he has issues, he has resentments, he has, you know, a constant need to prove his masculinity, and this like, oh, I'm not a woman, I don't have bad days. I mean, all of this vulgarity that he and Lukashenko and Trump all share, like you have to humiliate women, you have to show that you're dominant, this obsession with being respected, with not being given enough respect, with not being shown enough respect. The fact that Ukraine is going its own way. The analysis that my Russianist friends tend to give about what really upsets Putin about Ukraine, that, I mean, and nobody has access to his soul, so this is all speculation, is, I think, the fear that a Maidan could happen in Russia. I mean, in Masha Gessen's book, The Future is History,
right.
In some sense, what she really wanted to know was, she was there at Bolotnaya in those protests in 2011, 2012. And they failed and the Maidan succeeded. I mean, as a generalization, nothing ever succeeds perfectly, but, they didn't have the revolution that the protest movement seemed like it might have some promise of 10 years ago. And what Masha wants to know is, like, why were they able to do it? Why were they able to do it in Ukraine, and why were we not able to do it in Russia? And in some sense, that's what all the Russian oppositionists want to know. I remember after the Maidan, I was at a conference in Russia, the last time I was in Russia, when it was already kind of sketchy. And I saw there a colleague I hadn't, from Petersburg, who I hadn't seen in years, and he was talking about the Maidan, and he said, all of us, we watched the Maidan ecstatically. I mean, for us, it was, and I had to laugh because it was to me, it was the kind of thing you would say, we all watched it kind of in ecstasy. I'm like, yes, all of you, that's you and your 24 friends. I mean, that's like which is a very, like, it's our circle, which is all the people we can deal with because the rest of them can't be dealt with. I thought, yes, I think I know that all. Those were like the same 20 people we were hanging out at your apartment with, in St. Petersburg 10 years ago. But for the Russian intelligentsia, for like the Maidan was the possibility that, this. And I think it might have been the same thing for Putin, but in the opposite way. It might have been the source of terror, and they've created this precedent. It was something done by people who may be just entirely too similar, to my people, and therefore is a particular threat.
I think the way we see it from here, we've seen the generosity of neighboring countries like Poland, who have accepted a lot of refugees. You have also said somewhere in an interview that you think that good people together can stop this war. Here is hoping, Marci Shore, that good people really get together across the world and are able somehow to stop this war. Thank you so much for taking out time to have this conversation with us. This is Marci Shore speaking to us from Yale University in New Haven in Connecticut. Thank you, Marci.
Oh, thank you so much, Rahul. I'm so happy to see you.